Well, I'd love to welcome Shay to the stage and Jack Benjamin, who's a reporter at the Media Leader, and they'll be chatting about the gaming landscape. So please put your hands together. Cheers.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to be here talking about gaming, especially with Shay. I've been a video gamer for my entire life, so to sort of get into the commercial end of this and give a whole preview of what the gaming landscape looks like currently is a pleasure of mine, and I'm sure yours as well, Shay. So I guess why don't we start by, gaming has become, I feel like, more and more mainstream every year in broader culture since past 10, 15 years. What would you say has been the biggest change in the past year in terms of more and more people either playing games or becoming aware of big gaming properties like The Last of Us, for instance?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think this year specifically, seeing more video game adaptations has kind of brought video games to the forefront of people's minds. But then also I think from a couple of years ago, even I think we're pretty much over this conversation topic, but it was really important, was the pandemic. People sitting around playing or doing nothing but playing games, stuff like Animal Crossing. We were just talking about Wordle and New York Times connections. People don't necessarily consider those as big gaming properties, but I think just that kind of loop of playing games in that way, waking up every single day to engage with fun and games and art in that way, I think has made the big difference there.
How would you describe who a gamer is in 2023? Because I think a lot of people have an idea of what a gamer might have looked like in 2005, let's say, and it's very different now. So what would be your read on the broad audience?
Yeah, it's really funny. Whenever I'm getting cabs to and from places and I get asked about what I do, the first thing they ask me is, "Oh, so do you play the games?" I'm like, "Yes, babe." Yeah, I do play games. But I've been playing them my whole life. Yeah, there has been this idea that gamers are these basement dwelling, people who just never see the sun. And yeah, that can be my life sometimes, but it's not the reality for, massive amounts of people. So over 3 billion people worldwide play video games. And it's pretty split, gender-wise. So you've got over 50% of gamers being male. That's kind of not surprising, but then it's 49% for women or female people, and then in terms of trans and non-binary people, that's another 5%. And I feel that's something that kind of gets left out of the conversation, but yeah, all sorts of people play video games. Yeah.
When you get to a number as big as 3 billion, you're basically talking about everyone or every type of person.
Exactly.
What are they playing or where are they playing? I mean, you mentioned New York Times. Yeah, that's absolutely a game. That's on mobile probably for most people, but there's also console and PC. Are the types of gamers that play in different areas different? How should people be thinking about where people are playing?
Yeah, I think the more casual gamers, which actually makes up the largest part of the player base, they're playing games on mobile. And yeah, it's really funny, whenever I talk to people about being games, I could never, I'm not dexterous enough to play first-person shooters. But then they've clocked in and have played Candy Crush since the beginning of time, to the point where it's scary. I don't have 1,000 hours in anything, but so many people, older women, for example, have countless hours in Candy Crush. It's wild. I'm how do you have the time for anything else? Yeah, and I think console then kind of takes up the biggest chunk after after mobile gaming, and then after that it's PC, the more dedicated nerds of them all.
Yeah, the ones especially that build their own PCs.
Exactly.
In terms of the ecosystem that has sprouted around all of the games, you mentioned the pandemic, places like Twitch, YouTube, people that are streaming games, that's opened up an entire new audience. Esports is also huge. People that aren't necessarily even playing the games are still involved in the gaming community. Can you speak a little bit to how that's developed and where you see the likes of around the game being today?
Yeah, no, totally. Especially with the pandemic, so many people were just tuning in to watch live streams. Everyone just kind of remembered that Twitch existed, and the viewership just shot right up. And it wasn't even just like people playing games on there. Like I tuned in one time and someone was like making a sword, like just doing like blacksmithery. I don't even know if that's the right term, but it was like the wildest thing I've ever seen. But it was really cool. So yeah, that's a really big like audience that I think sometimes gets forgotten. But there are like brands like doing some really exciting work in places like that. For example, Charlotte Tilbury has a Twitch channel, and they do like Get Ready With Me's, but then they also do like live streams of like Apex Legends and stuff like that. And those are words, first of all, that are not in the Bible, but also like that you never think to put together. Like I, as someone who has loads of different like interests, the fact that like a maker brand would want to work specifically with like gamers and like do it in like such a meaningful way like has meant a lot, and they've seen a lot of like growth on that channel and for their brand in that way.
So more opportunity, you would say, for more brands to get involved.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's this idea that gamers like only play games, and I know that is definitely like a certain subset of them. Like, don't get me wrong, but a lot of gamers have a lot of different interests. I think one that I'm sort of seeing a lot of crossover like recently, but not necessarily seeing a lot of like partnerships happen with, is like fitness. That's like the big one that I think once people wake up and realize that some gamers like to leave their house and move their bodies, there could be some really exciting work happening there.
At this conference last year, I think the word metaverse probably came up constantly. I think even at the other event yesterday and earlier today, the word metaverse came up almost as a pejorative, like, oh, well, that didn't really pan out quickly in the short term. Is the metaverse dead? Is it not dead? Has it been redefined? Did gamers ever actually care about this term, or was it always just sort of something that was up on high and being sort of placed down upon people that are in the gaming community?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked the question, was the metaverse really alive? It just wasn't ever a thing for me to begin with. Which is kind of mean to say. I hope there are like no metaverse like investors in the room. But like I think what it is it's really frustrating because you had stuff like Second Life existing, that was the metaverse. So it kind of being presented as this like brand new like revolutionary thing was really surprising to me. And I was like, it's also just not that great. Like I've never, when I play games, like it kind of stops at whenever I leave my desk or whenever I, turn my console off, like that's it. And it just kind of felt really condescending to like people who've been making games for years, people who've been talking about games for years, and also like the game players themselves. So I think it's dead in the water. I think it's pretty safe to say, and I think there's a good reason for that. It just wasn't really exciting to begin with. Yeah, I mean, any application of it really just never felt like something that I should invest my time in. And one thing about gamers, they are very passionate. They are a very vocal like consumer group, but they weren't wrong about that one thing. Yeah.
I suppose part of it's been rebranded a bit to the Robloxes or Fortnites of the world as that sort of metaverse. I mean, these are massively popular games, so there's still that demand for perhaps in-game community, but maybe not. You don't require having a AR VR headset yet. Perhaps someday. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, exactly. Like those things just exist. Like those little like niches and those spaces exist, and they have existed like since the beginning of like gaming time. I think this need to kind of put them in these little like boxes, like I said, felt kind of condescending. And I honestly don't know anyone that can wear a VR headset for more than half an hour without feeling sick. I know that I can't, and I definitely.
I'm sure they're working on fixing those kinks.
I hope so.
I'm curious from the perspective of publishers, game publishers and developers, do they feel like there's more pressure on them to diversify their revenue source? Because we were talking earlier, games have stayed around $60 to $70 for 25, 30 years. And yet development costs have skyrocketed. So you would think that they're looking for new ways to diversify their revenue. They've done that through microtransactions. But is there extra room or pressure on them to look into advertising as an additional medium? And where do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, because with the like conversation about like microtransactions and like DLC and stuff, like where DLC before felt like a genuine like bonus and like, you know, additional content that was like a fully fleshed thing. Now it just kind of feels like parts of the game that should have been there from the beginning are being like taken out and then being like repackaged and sold back to gamers. And like I said, you know, they're not dumb. They know when they're being like sold to in a really like foul kind of way. So I think, yeah, there is more pressure to, on the advertiser side to kind of like pick up the slack a little bit. Yeah.
Opportunity.
Yes.
Perhaps more than pressure.
Is, probably the better word.
We mentioned the New York Times is I mean, perhaps one of the biggest gaming brands in the world, with Wordle and you mentioned connections. Another big entertainment company that is getting into gaming more and more is Netflix. We were talking about that a little bit earlier as well. How do you view these sort of new entrants into the gaming space? Because the likes of, let's say, Google with Stadia didn't work out at least a few years ago. They might look to enter again, I'm not sure. How do you view those new entrants coming in?
I think it's always going to be exciting, right? Like we have our sort of big three in the gaming world, your Sony, your PlayStation, and Microsoft. So having like a big player like Amazon or Google and now Netflix kind of step into the space was really exciting. I think the problem is that they haven't really like understood like what it is that's so compelling about video games. And that's probably why, like for example, like Amazon's kind of foray didn't take off in the way that they'd hoped. And I just think with like Google as well, the infrastructure just isn't there to kind of support it. Netflix is a bit more exciting though, because they have taken existing like IPs and have like built that into their platform, making it like really easy for people to access it if you don't have a console or like any sort of traditional way to play games. So yeah, I think that's like the most diplomatic read I can sort of give of it. And like I said, I think it's way more exciting, and I think it has more chance of it like taking off than the other two. Yeah.
When you mentioned that perhaps some of these bigger companies haven't known exactly what is so appealing about gaming, what did you mean by that? What is so appealing about gaming to you from a consumer perspective, but also, I suppose, from a business perspective?
The reain why I sided, again, I'm trying to choose my words very, very carefully because I got in trouble the last time I did this. With Amazon's, I think it was Lost Ark or like Crucible. Those are like the two titles. And at the time of their release, I think the Lost Ark was a kind of like an MMO, like a massive multiplayer online game, and the Crucible was like a first-person shooter, like a hero shooter in the same vein as Valorant or Overwatch. And I can name those two. I can name characters in both of those games. They were very memorable. They had like a really satisfying like gameplay loop, you know, kind of fast-paced, team-based gameplay. All of these things that like gamers love. It's fun, it's engaging, it's memorable, and I don't think that was the case for Crucible. I don't think the Lost Ark was memorable in the same way. Like we play games for stories, we play games for escapism, and none of those titles hit in that same vein. On the Google side, like I mentioned, me personally, like I don't need to have like cloud access to my Baldur's Gate 3 save, for example. Like I'll just wait until I get home, or I'll get a Steam Deck if I'm like itching to play it that bad. Like the desire is just not there yet. It's like trying to solve a problem that doesn't yet really exist. That's the Google problem. On the Amazon side, it's just lacking in creativity. Again, I'm so sorry, but that's just. Yeah, that was a very long-winded way to say that, but it just was really mean. Yeah.
We only have about a minute left. I want to make sure I ask you, you mentioned Baldur's Gate 3. I assume that's what you're playing right now.
Yeah.
Looking forward, what do you think are the big games, but also the big trends that you see in the next year or so coming up in this gaming space?
God, trends. I don't know about trends. I think we're probably going to see a lot more adaptations, and I think it was literally like yesterday, A24 like announced that they're going to be going into like more like action and like IP focused works. A lot of people were really annoyed by that, but if A24 like got their hands on something like Disco Elysium, for example, like that would be incredible. I think.
Fantastic game.
So yeah, I want to see like more creative like video game adaptations, and in terms of trends, yeah, I think that's the biggest one.
So more intermingling of big media companies that not necessarily gotten into games to a big extent are coming in and seeing opportunity.
Yeah, but doing it in a fun and creative way, please. Yeah, that's my hope.
All right, well, we're out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. But thanks so much, Shay, and please, audience, thanks Shay as well.